Hi, Jeremy Cordeaux in the Court of Public Opinion. I'm just on air here to let you know that we'll be live streaming the Court of Public Opinion every Friday between 9 o'clock and 12 on jeremycordeaux.com. Please join us. We'd love to have you.
Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me and I hope you enjoy the show. I'd just like to take a moment to tell you about a book that I've written. It's a memoir called Fool Me Twice, and it's a story about my life with a focus on my journey internet dating, where I was scammed and injured in the process. It's an educational book that will help many other people not to get caught in the same trap that I was. I'd like to also take this opportunity to play my book promo for you. Here it is.
From life on a farm in rural Australia, where wide open spaces made a young woman yearn to know what was beyond her country town. She moved to the city, became a mother, and found her dream career which took her across the world. But still, something's missing. In her search for love, she traveled far, trusted deeply. She wanted so badly to find someone that she almost lost herself in the process and learned some hard lessons along the way. Fool Me Twice, a new memoir by Jules Hannaford. Available August 20th on Amazon.
Today I'm here with Divya Samtani. Hi Divya, thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to see you again.
Hi Jules, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited.
You're very welcome. Divya, can you tell me where you're from and how you ended up living in Hong Kong?
Sure. So my story is a little bit of a long one. I was born in Taiwan. My mom's Taiwanese, my dad's Indian. But then at the age of 1, we moved to Toronto. I lived there for 9 years. And then I moved to New Jersey. We lived there 4 or 5 years. Then I moved to London. We lived there for about 8 years. And then I moved to New York City and I lived there for 5 years. And I moved to Hong Kong about 2.5 years ago.
Oh my gosh. So you're not a third culture kid. You're a sixth culture kid.
There's numerous cultures in there. Yeah, for sure.
Tell me a bit about the parenting program that you're running here in Hong Kong. What's that all about?
Yeah, so it's essentially the parenting part of it is an extension of the teen development program that I'm building, but it's to give parents an insight into what I'm trying to do with their kids, which is help bring them to the 21st century, not just in terms of skills and technology, obviously things that they're very aware of, but more around emotional intelligence, people skills, soft skills that I think are less quantifiable and measurable, obviously, and so therefore are often less addressed, but are equally, if not more important.
Is that what your teen program involves? Tell me a bit about that.
So Savvy Sapiens is essentially a platform for teens to explore themselves as well as the world around them. And there are different sort of aspects to this program. So there's obviously self-exploration. That's, I think, the most fundamental piece of it. But then, of course, there's also social exploration, career exploration, and then cultural exploration, so that they have a very well-rounded view of themselves and the world, and that they can connect with all these different pieces of their lives.
Fantastic. So where do you run this program?
It'll be run out of different co-working spaces across Hong Kong. So for example, I used to work at Meta, and so that'll be one of the venues, but I want to make sure that they have exposure to different places and that they're not just stuck in one place.
Typically, what sort of teenager would sign up for this program?
Essentially, we would say an emotionally intelligent teenager. But then what I've realized is that a lot of teenagers don't identify themselves as emotionally intelligent, and yet they have the potential to be. I mean, everyone does. So it's really whether or not they want to work on themselves personally and professionally, and whether or not they want to make a difference in this world.
Do you have parents coming in and working with the teenagers, or are they completely separate programs?
The parents piece was more of an awareness program. So the parents aren't so much involved in the development program itself. But what a lot of teenagers were saying to me is that it's all very well and good giving this training, these insights and this exposure to the kids, but they want their parents to be aligned with them and to understand the experiences that they're going through. And that makes a lot of sense to me, obviously. So I sort of tacked on the parents piece so that they could get involved in as much as they wanted to.
Yeah, that makes really good sense, actually, because if the kids are doing all this work and the parents are on board and they understand what they're doing, they can help move them along further or continue it after they leave, which is really good.
Exactly.
And with the parents, do they understand the benefits of what you're doing with their child and how much it can help them out in the world?
That's a great question. A lot of parents that I've spoken to do understand. The tough part is that we're not just competing with the kids. I mean, obviously the money, the parents that have to invest in this, but it's the kids' time that we're competing with. So it runs on a Sunday afternoon on the weekend and they want to be home and watch Netflix or do their homework or just chill and be with their family. And I completely understand that. And I think kids today are more loaded with ECAs or, extracurricular activities than ever before. And so I think parents are always just a little bit wary of their children's time. But in terms of the value that this program offers, I have parents come to me saying, do whatever you can to make sure this happens. And they are so extremely supportive and they completely understand because they're out there in the workplace and some of them are business leaders and CEOs and they know what they're hiring for and they've been through the journey that their kids are going to go through, which is to understand and obviously develop themselves as sort of the essential driver to their success. So they get it. It's just whether or not, I guess, children and parents have to get it at the same time.
Absolutely. And is one of your goals to enable young people to become global citizens?
Absolutely, yeah.
Tell me what that means to be a global citizen. What does it mean to you?
Being a global citizen is very much part of my DNA. I think it's who I am just out of sort of the sheer fact that I've lived in different places and I am different cultures. But I don't think you need to have had all of those experiences to be a global citizen. I think to be a global citizen, you have to have an open mind. You need to be able to empathize with other cultures, even if you haven't really come across them before. I think you need to be able to see yourself as a small part of a greater whole and to know that we're all interconnected. And that is obviously happening a lot more on the business level. On an economic level, markets in China affect markets in America.
And that's globalization.
Exactly. And families are moving themselves and their kids to different countries more and more. It's not just sort of before it was like military families that would live in different places. And now it's a lot of families. And this whole concept around digital nomad is becoming more and more prevalent amongst millennials for sure. But as those millennials become parents, they're going to have kids and want to take their kids to different countries. So I think just obviously the idea of globalization is going to become more and more of a concern, a great thing that's going to happen in our world. But even if you've just grown up in one place, I think you can be a global citizen by being aware of yourself as being part of a greater whole.
Absolutely. Trying to make a difference or giving back or being a conscious citizen.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just being conscious of your decisions is not just affecting yourself, but affecting the world around you. Even if you buy a plastic bottle today, where is it going to end up tomorrow? You don't have to have traveled to know that there's going to be a cause and effect.
When you talk about digital nomads, you're talking about how young people have access to the world via the internet and how they can really connect with people all over the world, which certainly I couldn't do as a teenager because there was no such thing. And then as a global nomad, they're kids that travel all over the world. So a digital nomad is somebody who travels over the world, but it's online, yeah?
Exactly. So businesses are able to be run online now. And you don't necessarily just have to be someone who develops an app to be able to do that. I'm a marketing professional and I can do that online as well. So what people want to do more and more is travel while they work. People do want to be tied to a desk to some extent, but a lot of people don't. And they have that freedom and that ability to live in Thailand whilst working with clients in Sweden. And that's going to happen more and more.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Is that the way of the future for the job market for the next generation?
I think so. And I think companies and corporates are starting to realize that. And so a lot of them are offering obviously like placement and exchange programs, but also, sabbaticals so that people can take a couple months out and travel. There are also a lot of, this concept of side hustle. So people will work in a company, but have a side hustle on the side, and that might take them to different places. So I think the idea of flexibility, whether physical or mental or just economical, it's just going to be more and more on top of people's agenda to be flexible.
That's so interesting. And when you say side hustle, do you mean a side job where you make money, or do you mean just a side hobby, or could it be either?
I think sometimes it grows from being a hobby to being a business.
That's me as a podcaster. It's a hobby, but one day it's going to be a business.
Exactly. It's very organic sometimes. I mean, there are people who sort of set out to just run a business on the side. It could be in e-commerce. They start with a couple products. it builds into, something a lot bigger. But the idea is that you shouldn't have to give up your day job to pursue something on the side, and you don't have to anymore. So I think a lot of companies are aware of that. They're sometimes even quite supportive of that, but it is great to do that in a way that means that you don't have to necessarily give something up, give your salary up or give your time up and just focus on one thing. You can do a couple things at the same time.
Is that the kind of way of thinking that you're trying to instill in the teenagers that you're working with in this day and age?
Yeah, so you could say it's an entrepreneurial mindset that I'm trying to instill. Absolutely. But from what I've learned in working with a lot of entrepreneurs through my time at Meta, which was an entrepreneurs club, so I came across a lot of them, the entrepreneurial journey is an extremely lonely one. And I think that's something that not a lot of people talk about, because it can seem very glamorous on social media and the internet, and everyone wants to be the next Mark Zuckerberg and, start their business out of a garage. But it's extremely difficult. It's long nights of lots of work. And sometimes a lot of entrepreneurs will tell you themselves that had they known how much work it would be, they wouldn't have become one, and they would have just stayed in their day jobs. So I think, yes, to instill an entrepreneurial mindset in the kids is really important, but I think to help give them the resilience to get through that and to help them understand the failure mindset, which is sort of like that whole Silicon Valley fail fast, fail forward mindset, where you learn and you iterate and you kind of move forward really quickly. Because what I understand, obviously, from having been a teenager and speaking to a lot of teenagers today, is that people are afraid of making mistakes. And you can't be afraid of making mistakes if you're an entrepreneur, because you wouldn't get very far.
I feel like that's a bit of a culture in Hong Kong with kids in particular, that there's this real sense of achievement and the need to achieve and that fear of failure. And it's so interesting that I think a number of our kids, sometimes they don't fail until they get to university, and it becomes a massive shock, because they haven't had that experience of failure, of a setback. So they haven't even had to build their resilience because they're in such a nurtured, cushioned, safe environment here in Hong Kong. So it's kind of interesting. So I do say to my students, when they fail, it's like, this is an amazing learning experience for you. You can learn more from this than your successes.
I completely agree. Yeah, I mean, my university rejections was the first time that I ever felt like I failed, and it took me a really long time to get over it.
Yeah, exactly. I know of a number of kids who haven't really had a big rejection or a big disappointment until they get to university, and that can be actually very difficult for them because it's a shock. Whereas kids who struggle a bit more, they do seem to build resilience, and then they have this kind of hardiness that some of these other kids don't have.
It's this weird catch-22 situation. So a really interesting anecdote is that apparently one of Google's interview questions is asking whether or not you've had a loss in your family, because they're looking for resilience. And resilience is born out of challenge and adversity and setback, like you just said. The problem is, it's not really up to a kid whether or not they've gone through hardship. And great parents don't want to put their kids through that. So when it comes to building resilience, if that's the number one quality that employers are looking for, how do you really build that muscle without putting your kids through the ringer? So I think a lot of it comes through exploration, experimentation, like letting kids just try small things. And if they fail, that's great. They won't hurt themselves or anybody else, but they need to do more of that at an earlier age, which is why exploration is a really big part of my program.
As parents, should we make a point of not catching our kids too quickly if they're falling and not being there to absolutely protect them as much as we do? Like, I think even as a parent, I was guilty of that. And I can see that maybe allowing for more mistakes and failure and not trying to fix everything as quickly as I did might have helped my child build resilience. Do you think that that's wise advice for parents?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting generational thing where my parents weren't protected at all by their parents. And it was very much, I suppose, the generation that was sent out and go get your knees dirty and cut up and you'll be fine and you'll get on with life.
That was my generation.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And my dad, the age of, I think it was like 21, fresh out of university, moved from India to Taiwan to build a business. And he kind of did so. You just do it and you don't think too much. And because I suppose of his experience, he wanted to protect us as much as possible. And so I feel like I did grow up very mollycoddled, and I can see how that's affected me in my decisions. And I don't think there's any right or wrong when it comes to parenting, but my sister is a lot younger than me. She's 15 years old now. And so I do tell my father a lot of times with my sister to let her be. She'll figure it out and she'll learn it on her own. And sometimes when she learns things on her own experientially, that's when it'll stick versus my mom or dad giving her the benefit of their experience, explaining to her what they learned. It's indirect learning. It's passive learning. She's not going to be in her brain as much.
How do you think you were negatively impacted by your parents being on top of you more than you would normally expect?
It's an interesting question. I think feeling their fear for me and their worry and their anxiety for me, I think that's something that gets transferred to the child. For example, if I went hiking and my dad was very, very worried about my safety, it made me worry a lot about my own safety. And sometimes, these worries and stresses are valid and sometimes they're really not. And so it can be difficult for a child to then be able to differentiate between real danger and not real danger. And you end up being afraid of everything. And that has played through a lot of different aspects of my life.
That's so interesting. Yeah, that makes complete sense. What are some of the key concerns that parents have about their teenage children, do you think, in this day and age?
Well, I think social media is definitely one, just in terms of it being sort of a force of influence in their child's development of their brain and their self-esteem and their confidence. And I think it's a very fair concern. I think the increased amount of competition. I think the fact that I was reading a stat yesterday that almost half of the jobs that exist today won't exist in the same way in 25 years' time. So then there's that fear of relevance. And will we be made redundant by the time we're even just finished with college? How can we help them be set up for success in the future in a world that we don't really know anything about? And I think the rate of change is exponential now. So things have always been changing, but the change is happening so much faster that parents don't really know where to start when it comes to preparing their kids and giving them the tools to succeed. So I think there are a lot of concerns on parents' mind from what I understand. I think there's a lot more conversation around wellness and health and well-being. And I think that's really important. Having sort of gone through some of those issues myself, and I'm not even 30 yet, I can see that happening at an earlier and earlier age. I was talking to the kids at another school in Hong Kong on Tuesday and was telling them about the midlife crisis and how it's become a quarter life crisis now. And a lot of my friends...
Everyone at 25.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, they kind of go off the deep end at that point. And I kind of looked around and was like, what is happening to me and my friends? It was really absurd. And so if that was happening at 25, was it going to start happening at 20, 18, 16? And so I think just emotional well-being is going to be of greater and greater concern to parents.
I think that is tied in with social media and pressure and competition. It's all linked together. It's all like a bit of a vicious cycle, isn't it?
Yeah.
Are these the things that you address in your parenting workshops?
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's always an interesting dynamic between parents and kids, and that it really doesn't matter how open you are to each other. There are just some things that parents are not going to know about their kids. And I've been really lucky in that I'm an older sister. I'm not a parent, but I have enough of an age difference between myself and my younger sister. She's 13 years younger, that I can see it from my parents' perspective, but I give her advice from almost parental perspective, but she tells me everything. I think everything. I know a lot. And she's extremely open with me because she trusts me and she knows that I've been through it not too long ago. And I can really empathize with her. So I do feel like I have a privileged position and that I can help parents sometimes navigate difficult conversations and give them sort of insights that they might not have from sort of their child as a direct channel.
Do you have some top parenting tips for people?
So, I mean, I'm obviously not a parent myself, but a lot of the ways in which I deal with my sister or that we actually interact with each other can be sort of, I guess, used from a parent's perspective as well. So I would say, and she catches me out on this a lot, but I would say always really try and be aware of your own feelings going into a conversation. A lot of the times that we'll have sort of conflict, it's because she's hit on one of my insecurities or one of my fears, or she said something or done something that I then reflect on myself negatively towards. And so I've realized the importance of self-awareness when it comes to dealing with someone younger, because essentially they have no filter. Quite often they have no filter and they're not really thinking when they're saying things sometimes. And so this happened a lot more when she was younger, but she would touch upon things that have been wounds in myself, sort of emotionally for a while. And I would flare up, of course. And it was to no fault of her own. And I would then say, make sure you never say that again. How could you say that? But she didn't understand why. And I then had to go back and reflect and explore and understand why I was so angered and upset. And I think it's just being conscious in your conversations with children and understanding why you're getting upset and if it has anything to do with them or not.
And trying to leave the emotion out of it, try and be a bit more pragmatic.
Yeah, exactly. And sort of meeting them on their level. And there's so many times that my sister has said things to me that I don't necessarily deem important or as terrifying as she does. And in my mind, I'm an adult, so I have busier and more important things to think about. And that's not fair. You have to see life from their perspective. And empathy is something that you could really leverage in any situation.
Absolutely. And it's about giving them space, isn't it? Giving them space to be listening. Listening is so important. And we have such busy lives here in Hong Kong. It's so easy to rush past everything, isn't it? Rather than sitting and taking the time and really listening. Yeah. And sometimes that's all teenagers want, is someone just to really listen and empathize.
Yeah, absolutely. What you're saying is exactly that. It's holding space for somebody. So sometimes they don't even need you to say anything. It's truly just listening, asking them questions so that you're almost sort of teasing their feelings out of them, because they won't necessarily volunteer everything and they may not even know what's happening inside them at the point. So you just have to ask them questions, hold space for them. I think judgment is possibly the one thing I will say for sure that I think shuts down a relationship really quickly.
Yeah.
And I can tell sometimes myself when I'm judging my sister, I don't even realize, and she'll catch me out on it and she'll shut down. And to make sure that you're almost being just a mirror to them, holding space without judgment and not letting your fears come out and not letting them feel shame, because shame, again, is something that really breeds a lot of darkness and sadness. And just being there for them, I think is, the most important.
That's brilliant. That's so spot on. And I look back at myself as a parent and I really see that I was a fixer. I wanted to fix everything.
Yeah.
So I think it would have been much better if I'd done more of that, just holding space rather than wading in and trying to sort everything out. And it's only on reflection that I can see that. I couldn't see that at the time, but I wasn't being self-reflective. I never sat back and sort of thought, how am I doing as a parent? What could I improve on? I was very young, but that's not an excuse.
Yeah, it's a coaching technique that I've picked up. I'm not a professional coach by any means, but one of the models that I've looked into, Coactive, it talks about people being creative and resourceful and whole within themselves. And so they actually have all the answers. And it takes a lot more time to sit there and kind of develop that with them and help guide them through questioning versus telling them the answer. And absolutely, I'm with you. I try and fix all my sister's problems, but then she doesn't go through that growth process herself. So yeah, I do try to be more aware of that.
What are some of the mistakes that you think that parents make in this day and age?
I think it's, stuff that we all do. For example, not being present. There's so many times I'm checking emails and I'm half listening to my sister. And because in my mind, what she's saying is not as relevant, and that maybe she'll be talking about her day, but it'll go on for ages. And I'm like, all right, let me just quickly check this email. But even in those split seconds, you're losing their trust. And at a subconscious level, they're thinking, okay, that's okay to do to other people. And it's not. And devices are obviously something that we all have to struggle with. So I would say just being present, that's probably the most important thing. Yeah.
Do you get a sense of what teenagers are looking for from their parents or what they feel that they need?
That's a really good question. I think kids are getting smarter and smarter by the day. So whereas they possibly looked to their teachers and parents for information before, they're not anymore because they can teach themselves on the internet.
That's so true.
And they often do.
Yeah.
It's less about the information that they can provide. It's more, I would say, being a sounding board. There's so many times that my sister has all these great ideas and she just needs someone to kind of like bounce back and forth with. And so they need their parents as partners almost. And I would say as well as being coaches, right? So like, and putting less of their own
agendas,
needs and agendas, and just reflecting back so that the child can recognize and realize within themselves what they're looking for because they have the answers already.
And doing it without judgment, because if you leave the judgment at the door, then the kids feel safe talking to you about anything.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's amazing how much kids withhold from their parents because they're afraid of disappointing them, that they'll get angry, that they'll be punished, that they'll be judged. So if we could let go of all of that, then that would build our connections with our children and then they'd be able to open up to us more.
Exactly. And I think the difficulty sometimes is parents have a pretty clear idea of what they want their children to be like, sort of a reflection of them. And so
it's almost a reflection of what they weren't, what they wish they were.
Yeah.
It's called living your dream through your children, isn't it?
I catch myself doing that with my sister as well. So I have to be really wary of it. But she kind of came into this earth with everything she needs already. She has the wisdom, insight. She has the passion and drive. So she just needs a support system. She needs people to be her cheerleaders, not sort of tell her which direction to go into.
When things do go wrong, to be the person to pick them up, dust them off and tell them that you love them and that you'll help them solve the problem rather than freaking out.
Exactly. Because two people freaking out does not.
I know. Well, it doesn't help, does it? No, it doesn't help at all.
Exactly.
And if you do, your kids won't come back to you next time when they really need help. Like I remember making it super clear to my daughter that I was there for no matter what, anything she could come and talk to me about.
Yeah. I would just add one more thing to that, which is I think being humble enough to learn from your kids and also the honesty of making a mistake. So I talked to my sister a lot about courageous vulnerability. I think that's something that parents sometimes struggle with. And I completely understand why. As an adult, you don't want to show kids that you are worried or freaking out in the sense that you don't want them to think less of you. And sometimes when I make a mistake with my sister and she knows I've made a mistake, but I don't want to admit it, it's times when I come forward and I admit it that she has more respect for me.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I was at Diwali Ball rehearsal. We had Diwali Ball recently, which I run. And I got so stressed and the behavior of a couple of boys upset me so much, I started to cry. And one of the girls came up to me in front of 350 kids. And one of the girls, senior girls, came up and said, Miss H, do you want to go outside? And I'm like, no, I want everyone to see this is real life. This is what it's like. This is what happens when you can't be responsible. And these are my real feelings and I'm not embarrassed. So I think that was a positive lesson for them to learn. And it was actually great that I did it because, they all lifted their game massively. They were great. Yeah, it was really good.
It's times like that they really feel like they can connect with you because you're human.
Yes.
And they've seen your fear and your sadness. And it's actually times when, previous CEOs or managers that I've had have shown that human side of theirs and that their own stresses and worries that I've really gotten myself up and been like, oh, I need to help them. And we need to get through this together because they're human. So sometimes, a shiny, perfect facade doesn't really help relationship building.
Show your vulnerability, allow your mistakes to come through and be yourself and don't sort of sugarcoat it. And you don't have to be perfect. And that's a lesson for life, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And really to have success in life is all really about building relationships, isn't it?
Yep. Absolutely couldn't say it better myself.
Yeah, it's all about building relationships, whether it's at work, at school, with your children, with your parents, all of that. It's just about the connection.
And with yourself.
Yeah, exactly. That's true too. Yeah. How can we do that? How can we connect with ourselves?
Well, I would say just being really patient with yourself. Like this is possibly the greatest lesson I've learned in my life, to have compassion with myself, because they often say that when you're judgmental of others, it's because you're really judgmental of yourself. It took me a long time to realize that, but it's true. I held really high standards for everything, everyone around me. And it's because I had really high standards for myself. And it wasn't just about, setting goals and wanting to achieve them. It was, I think you have to be really aware of your negative self-talk. And people think that by being critical with themselves, they can achieve more and they can drive themselves harder and faster and get to, a higher and better place. And I disagree now after having gone through that. I think if you're compassionate with yourself, you end up being pulled to a higher and better place rather than being pushed. And there's only so long that negative critical self-talk is going to allow you to continue, and it's not sustainable. So I think really being aware of those thoughts, that's why I think meditation has gotten to be such a big deal, because it is about being alone with your thoughts. But then I think people even judge themselves through the meditation because they're having thoughts and they're judging themselves for having thoughts. And then they're not being very compassionate with themselves. And besides the point.
Yeah.
So I think there's a way of being compassionate and forgiving of yourself and being happy, as well as achieving, the things that you want to achieve in your life. And I think the two go hand in hand. And I think the most successful entrepreneurs, a lot of them are the most playful and almost childlike and wondrous. And I realized that I've always been like that. I just didn't want to show it because I felt like it was a weaker side of myself versus the sort of cutthroat, I can get this stuff done, executioner side of myself. And I've kind of realized that you need a balance of the two. And I've become a lot more compassionate with myself.
Oh, good for you. So did you have to work through some emotional difficulties when you were younger to get to the place that you're in now?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Can you talk to me a bit about that?
Yeah, I was sort of the typical high achieving type A, need to be the best kind of kid. And then, you just become an adult that thinks like that as well. And I think I probably used to blame my parents for it. I have Asian parents and that they wanted me to be the best. They wanted me to go to the best university and get the best job. I think as I grew older, I realized that my parents actually only cared about my happiness. I'm pretty lucky that my parents really weren't. And my mom was Tiger Mom in some respects, but she generally just wanted my good health. And she actually often told me to be a teacher. She never told me to go into corporate America and to become, a CEO of some company. She actually said, Divya, just go be a teacher. You'll have a great life. You'll be with kids. You'll be relaxed, have fun. And I was like, no, that's not ambitious enough. So I think I used to put it on my parents, but what I realized is you need to take ownership over your own emotions. And so once I realized that it was myself driving myself to that point, I had to take a look at my ego and wonder why I wanted to be the best in everything and why I would show up to the office at 6 a.m. when I definitely did not need to be there at that time. And
what did you discover?
I think people use work as a great way to distract themselves. And it's so easy because it's so satisfying. And when you're really into the gold stars at school, you get really into the promotions, into the, you love the appreciation, the recognition you get at work, and you feel really great and you feel like you're moving forward in your life. But then I kind of realized that I had no other aspects of my life that I really enjoyed. I mean, I had a great family and friends and network and things like that, but I didn't have passions. I didn't have hobbies. I didn't really think too much about what I woke up for in the morning. And at the end of the day, work is only a small part of your life. And if you make it everything and you're trying to prove yourself, you have to ask yourself at some point who you're trying to prove yourself to. And when I realized it wasn't my parents anymore and they kind of denied all responsibility, which was fair enough.
Yeah.
They had never really put that in my head in the first place. I had. Then I had to have like a pretty long conversation with myself. By long, I mean it was like 4 or 5 years long.
Did you do therapy through this or any sort of well-being stuff or mindful stuff?
I did a lot of reading.
Okay.
I read everything. I started with things like the Happiness Project. I went into Brene Brown. I learned about vulnerability. I went into a lot of meditation stuff. I even read business books. I kind of just read everything around personal growth and personal transformation. I mean, I just went to a Tony Robbins seminar about 2 months ago.
Oh, wow.
In Australia.
How was that?
It was really, really something. I mean, his energy. And
I know he's quite powerful,
level,
isn't he?
Hugely powerful. Yeah, absolutely. And after having gone through, I guess, 4 or 5 years of this intense search, I don't know if you've ever read The Alchemist, but it's amazing. And it's this allegory for life that he goes on this incredible journey to try and find like, I don't know, I think it's like a treasure or the answer to life. And it loops back around. And by the end of it, he starts in the same, I think it's like a field or a tree that he started in as like a shepherd, a goat herd. And that's essentially what happened to me. I kind of realized I had all the answers inside myself. And whilst everything kind of helped in terms of they were tools to give me the confidence and the awareness that I needed to continue, the search wasn't for anything outside of myself. It was within. And I think once I read this really incredible book called Radical Acceptance. And I think once I came to terms with myself, that there was nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, even in my past, if I was a certain way that I wouldn't be now, that's not something to judge myself for. And it's been a really, really long sort of journey, but I think I'm starting to get there. It never ends because
it's
life continues. Yeah.
Lifelong learning for sure. I'm dying to know a little bit about the Tony Robbins seminar. What happened? What was it like?
Oh my gosh. Incredibly intense. It's 4 days. So I did Unleash the Power Within. The first, I would say, in a series of other types of events you could go to. You've seen the Netflix documentary that was about Date with Destiny. It's a different one. Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
So that's 6 days. It's a lot more intense. But 4 days, I mean, you're essentially there from 9 in the morning or 8 in the morning to sometimes midnight. Sometimes they let you go a little earlier.
No.
But yeah, they pack the day and you don't really have any breaks. Like I think on 2 of the days you have a lunch break, which is like an hour. But then on the first day, you don't have any breaks. So you're like running to the bathroom whenever you can in between like a brief pause between speakers. Like it's really crazy. Tony doesn't himself speak both days. He speaks 2 of the days. And that's because his vocal cords are sort of being shred up by all the speaking stuff that he does. So he has his team come in and guide you through the other 2 days, which I mean, they're just as great. But I went as far as to get a VIP ticket because I really wanted to be on the floor because I wanted to feel Tony's energy. And so he was literally 2 inches away from me. Like he spat on me. Like I could feel him like right in front of me, and his power and his compassion as well. You know, it's really palpable. He is all about contribution and giving back and growth. And you really feel it when you're in his presence. And there is something incredibly divine about him, and not in like
godly
cult-like
way.
type of way,
Yeah.
But he's really trying to serve others. And this is something I'm really trying to imbue into my own work. And I've realized that it takes a lot of the fear out of it because Tony says this a lot, that you either are making decisions based in fear or based in love. And once I started to be aware of my own decisions through that lens, I realized that when I was nervous or was dreading something, it was always fear-based. And so if I could instead gear myself the other way, I could get through my life more smoothly. And the way that you become more infused with love is when you really feel like you're serving others and you're supporting others and you're inspiring and helping others. And that way you don't feel any fear.
That's so true. That's brilliant. And that kind of comes back to gratitude, doesn't it?
Yeah. Gratitude is a really big piece of this. My parents gave me everything. So I grew up in a very comfortable household, and I was really, really lucky and really fortunate because my parents didn't have anything. So they gave their kids everything. And when you don't experience anything other than your own upbringing, it's really hard to feel gratitude sometimes because you're like, well, what's the difference, right? I just grew up in this. It's like a fish in water. Do they know they're in water? They just have always been it their entire lives.
Great analogy.
And yeah. So sometimes life is like that. And I chose to expose myself to different ways of living. I traveled a lot because I wanted to see what life was like for others. And you don't necessarily necessarily have to do that. I think even just realizing small acts of kindness and being really grateful for good friends that listen to you, because you know that there are people who don't have good friends in the world. And just, you could be grateful for anything. And when I realized that gratitude, it's not something that you have to, I know there are a lot of people who talk about waking up in the morning and writing down 5 things. And I used to do that for sure. But it's now just in my moment to moment type experience that I can feel gratitude, because I know that it doesn't have to be this way. I mean, we don't have to be sitting here. I'm very grateful that you kind of reached out to me and invited me to do this podcast. And so if I see every experience in life as something that's really great, and even negative experiences, I went through a lot of health issues, like really bad autoimmune disorders. And I'm really grateful for those experiences too, because had I not gone through that, I wouldn't have gone through this sort of journey of like experience, self-discovery and experiences that I have. So I'm pretty grateful for everything.
So do you feel like those illnesses sort of contributed to how you are or who you are today?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know how many people are aware of this, but in terms of the etymology of the word passion, it originally meant suffering, which I should have realized when I watched The Passion of the Christ. And I was like, I don't get it. Why is he so passionate? But it's his suffering. So when I realized that, and I realized that actually for a lot of successful people, it's their pain that then drives their passion. I mean, I'm talking about Tony Robbins. The reason he's doing the work he's doing today is because he grew up in a really difficult household and he wants to be able to make life better for others and give back to people the kind of kindness that he got from others, from strangers. And so I don't regret anything in my life. And I think that every experience I'm so grateful for, because I wouldn't be the kind of person I am today without it, for sure.
Oh, that's really beautiful. I love that. That's
Thanks.
lovely. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
Do you think that kids are not being taught all of these skills we've been talking about in schools, and that's why you need to run your program?
Well, I think it's tough for schools, and I don't want to put schools down at all, because I think they're doing the best that they can to change in line with the times. But the fact is that I think we're going into a people-based economy. So I think before, sort of information was the capital, right? Like people were looking for people with the most information. So you go to the universities with, the biggest libraries and the most beautiful books and the teachers and stuff, because you're looking for information. But now that information is so widespread, I mean, you can get it in a heartbeat. People aren't necessarily looking for that anymore. They don't need people with the best memories because they can just Google things. So what are they looking for? They're looking for people with people skills. And the fact is, with AI and automation not only on its way, but already being implemented, the workforce is going to change dramatically. And so a lot of the lower level stuff, a lot of like data crunching and Excel inputting and all this stuff that, myself and my peers used to do when we graduated, those are tasks that aren't going to necessarily be taken up by humans anymore. And so people are going to have to learn to be others and be managers and, of course, manage technologies, but manage teams. And so the people aspect is something that is really important. And I honestly don't know what the answer is when it comes to education. I don't know how schools can switch almost, overnight from teaching academic subjects to people-based things, especially when people-based subjects are not quantifiable and measurable.
I think we're moving in that direction, certainly in international schools, but there's huge demands on curriculum time. And I think that's one of the big things, doing the IB, kids have got to have a certain number of hours of in-class education on each of the subjects. And it's time. Time is a big thing. I think there's awareness that kids need to develop these people skills. They need to develop their self-confidence. They need to develop their resilience. These are all things that I think we're beginning to work on. But I think running courses like yours, it's like fast tracking them, isn't it? So it really gives them a lot more in-depth delving into it and really a lot more opportunities for self-reflection.
Yeah, essentially what I'm doing is I'm encapsulating my almost a decade of experience in terms of what has enabled me to become successful. So success, firstly, is a subjective term, so you can really define it how you like. But what has enabled me to, I guess, become more visible in companies or be able to work more successfully with other people has always been my people skills. It's my ability to ask questions, similar to what you're doing now. It's my ability to empathize. It's my ability to be humble and learn from others, no matter how young or old they are. It's always been my people skills. And so having realized that that is what gets me to be promoted, or that's what gets me in the door in companies, and that's what companies are looking for, then like you're saying, it's fast tracking the kids, because if that's what's going to get them to be successful, then of course they need a school education, sure, but they 100% need this piece, or they're missing a really large piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you think teenagers can build their self-confidence and their self-esteem?
I would say definitely through exposure. It's really hard to learn confidence through books and being taught. I think the more people you meet, the more experiences you have, the more social situations you plunge yourself into, whether or not you think they're going to be comfortable, and more often it's through your discomfort that you grow, the more you build confidence. I mean, they always say, especially in Silicon Valley, like, you get confidence through action. You have to build and do and try and fail. And then you get confidence because you've done it before. It's hard to be confident in something you've never done before. You can pretend, sure, and then it'll get you through the first hurdle. But to continue building your confidence, you have to try things. So I would just say experimenting and exploring brings you confidence because you know that there are things out there and there are people out there that also don't know what they're doing. So that's one of, I think, the biggest realizations I had when I first went into my career was that, sure, as a 21-year-old out of university, I thought I was not good at networking. But then I go to a lot of parties. I worked at a media and advertising agency. And I realized that a lot of other adults, 30, 40, 50 years old, were also really bad at networking. And they didn't know what to say to me, and as much as I didn't know what to say to them. And so when I realized that people were sort of winging it, no one really knew what they were doing in terms of, sometimes with leading teams, managers don't know what they're doing. And at parties, a lot of people don't know what to say. And so if everyone is figuring it out together, that's what gave me confidence.
Yeah, and so don't be afraid.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to try stuff. Don't be afraid to step outside of your comfort zone and take a risk.
Exactly, because everyone's right there with you.
Yeah, exactly. Do you think the mental health issues are on the rise for teenagers? Or do you think that we're just hearing about it more because it's becoming a little bit more acceptable to talk about it?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I think there's more recognition of it, more validation of it. I would say, I think anxiety and stress for sure is on the rise. And we know the reasons for that. And I think especially as our world becomes more urbanized, that's one of the reasons I love Hong Kong because it's, of course, a very global, fast-paced city, but the nature's right here. And your school overlooks the ocean and the mountains are right behind us. And I think that really helps with mental health. I think getting out there into nature and just feeling, again, like I said, you're a part of this greater world and just really taking time to breathe really helps. So I do think mental health will be a bigger problem as people live in cities and feel increasingly disconnected and
work harder to succeed,
which is why I think the narrative around success has to change. And I love Arianna Huffington for doing this. I love her for coming forward and saying, you are not a bad business leader or a bad CEO or a bad entrepreneur for wanting to sleep. There is no reason to glorify, this whole culture of busyness and productivity and no sleep and, the whole hustle mindset. It's great. Of course, you have to work hard and hustle if you're building a business, but are you supposed to be killing yourself in the process? Because that seems pointless to me.
Exactly. Yeah. And she's great. She's such a great role model. So I think it's about well-being. It's about listening. It's about sharing and caring. It's about giving back. It's about being grateful for what we've got. There's a lot of things that we can really do to change this world and for the positive. And I think anybody listening to this podcast is going to feel so inspired by what you've had to say. I really do. So. Yeah, I am. I'm inspired.
I feel inspired just by having this conversation.
I want to go out and walk and I want to go and give back. Yeah, I want to make a difference. So, Divya, if people want to get in touch with you and they would like their teenagers to do your program or they would like to do your parenting program, how can they do that?
Sure. So our website is savvysapiens.com. That's SAVVYSAPIENS.com. So always reach out to me via email, which is divyasamtani@gmail.com. So DIVYASAMTANI@gmail.com. And yeah, I'm pretty responsive. So that's
great. Do you do anything online courses for if parents and teenagers are listening around the world?
Not yet.
That's something you could work towards.
That is absolutely on the horizon.
So if you're in Australia and you like what you hear and you want to push it, send her an email.
Let me know, please.
Yeah, send her an email.
The support is hugely welcome.
Yeah, and if you're out there listening and you feel like there are parents or teenagers out there that would really benefit from this conversation, please share this podcast. Share it with your friends. Put it on your social media. Get it out there because there's so much wisdom in what you've had to say, Divya. I'm really impressed. And I think that, share this podcast, guys, because there's a lot of people out there that would really, really benefit from your wisdom. So thank you so much for meeting with me today.
Thank you for having me. This is the funnest thing I've done in a long time.
It's been absolutely amazing. I'm just so inspired. So thank you so much. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Hi, Jeremy Cordeaux in the Court of Public Opinion. I'm just on air here to let you know that we'll be live streaming the Court of Public Opinion every Friday between 9 o'clock and 12 on jeremycordeaux.com. Please join us. We'd love to have you.